Welcome, everyone, to the ExecuBalance podcast, where we dive into what it looks like to have balance in our professional and personal pursuits. I'm Chad Crow. I'll be your host for this episode. I'm also the CEO of Tech Digital and father to 4, husband to 1, so I know what it's like to have a crazy schedule and struggle to find balance. Before we begin today's episode, I want to invite you to help us continue the conversation by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We look forward to connecting and having deeper conversations so that we all can grow together and continue this podcast. So please connect with us there, as well as make sure to visit our website at ExecuBalance.com. All right. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful to be here.
I guess kind of the best way to jump into this, to get to know you more, is to kind of maybe at a high level, let's roll through some of the roles that you're filling right now and some you've filled in the past for work and personal life.
Great. Yeah, so good to be here. Most important role today is leader of my family. I've got 4 kids. I'm ranging in age from 24 all the way down to 14. So, in different stages of life. Wife, Jennifer, high school sweetheart, been married for 27 years now. Wow. And so that's literally the most important team that I lead. But I've also had, as you mentioned in my other roles in life, I've had some really cool, privileged opportunities to lead some pretty interesting companies. Pfizer Consumer Healthcare, a lot of consumer packaged goods companies, all most recently up to Coca-Cola. Had 7 years of leading innovation and innovation strategy for them globally. And then kind of took a risk and went out to be a president of a small company, small leadership development organization, grew that, and then departed from that organization and now currently lead a company called Dscoop, which helps Hewlett-Packard's global customer base grow faster. And it's a community-based organization and just a blast.
And we were talking before we started about your morning, and you've already had a jam-packed day, right?
Yeah, roger that. We had about 400 people on a global webinar, just teaching our community how to gain some growth in this crazy economy. And we had 40 countries, I believe, attend. It was a fantastic time. It's amazing what you can do virtually, and when you look at virtual differently and really drive engagement and interaction and make it human, I think that's when you see some real success. So we saw that this morning.
Oh, that's great. So roles in business, roles in the family, of being a father, being a husband, all of those things. And I think kind of an area where we can really learn from is when we start taking and looking at times when those roles kind of conflicted, or you got into I've got a friend who calls it the rent cycle of just circling around over and over again. You've got babies, you got a business. And so looking at those times, talk to me a little bit about maybe a time when all of those roles were coming together and felt maybe a little overwhelming.
Yeah, so they always are. And I think that's the one thing that we often neglect when the business side is when somebody comes into the organization or they walk through the doors of a company, they're bringing a whole life with them. They're not just bringing who they are for Techwood, or they're not bringing who they are for Coca-Cola, but they're bringing who they are as a human and all the other roles that go along with that. So I can think back on my days at Coke when I was traveling the world. I think I visited around 50 countries, close to 50 countries during 7 or 8 years there. So I was on the road a lot, and that was a time when we had a lot of young children. So my sweet bride, Jennifer, had to pick up the responsibility in a lot of areas when I was gone for a week or sometimes even 2 weeks in a global type of an environment. So I think it gets to that quality quantity discussion, and I don't know. I believe that quality is certainly important, but quantity is really important, and you have to make that priority. That when you are home, you've got to devote that time in the right direction. You can't walk into the house at 5, 6 o'clock at night and then just shut down. As a dad and as a leader of the home, when you walk through that door, you've got to be on, and you've got to be on heavy because they need your time. And it can't just be weekends, it's got to be in the evenings and, everything else. And then, when I was on the road, and for those who, are traveling a lot, obviously we haven't been in the last year, but we'll get back to it. Just that regular check-in and constantly connected in. It's funny, when I used to travel globally for Coke, and for Dscoop, my current roles, the two roles that I did a lot of the global travel, I would keep myself on Eastern Standard Time regardless of where I was in the world. So if I was in Shanghai, China, I'd be getting to bed at 6, 7 o'clock at night, and then getting up real early in the morning. Partly because it was good for me physically, but also because it gave me better access to the family during their times. When you're on the other side of the world and you're calling in the middle of their night, it gets a little odd and you get disconnected. But if there's some tips and tricks that you can do when you're traveling to stay connected in with the family.
I think we can push in there a little bit. Like, what are some other tips? Like, I think that's a valuable tip for people who are traveling to stay on your time frame and to own that. Like, I know you're a big proponent of the book Extreme Ownership, and so I love that you've just grasped onto that. And that was something that you were going to intentionally do to make sure that you were available, even though you weren't present.
Mm-hmm.
What are other things?
Well, I mean, we were talking about it right before the podcast about these, this concept of a life plan and a life strategic plan, and how often as business leaders, we spend a lot of time in planning. And I think you did a podcast recently on it, and I think it's really smart. I really do. I think sitting down with your family and writing out KPIs and objectives and measurable, activities, and then holding yourself accountable to those at the end is pretty powerful. And I when I look back, I did that to some degree. I've been a big believer in developing an ethos as a leader, having an ethos document that I keep in my journal every day, and I connect with it probably weekly. Just connect with those statements that I wrote about who I am as a father, who I am as a follower, who I am as a husband, and holding me accountable to those things. I think that's documenting those things, I think, can really be powerful. And then surrounding yourself with other men, if you're a man, or other women, if you're a woman leader, that can hold you accountable to those things, I think is really important.
I think too, one of the things you mentioned before we jumped onto was you've invited your wife to hold you accountable to those as well.
Yeah, she doubles as the Holy Spirit in my life most of the time. No, but she does. She's aware of the ethos statement. She's read it, and she knows that that's what drives me. And she, I think in her heart, if she was sitting next to me, would say that Keith, really does take the responsibility of being, the leader of Team Wilmot as seriously as he does of Team Dscoop or Team Coke or anything that I've done in the past.
And obviously that's something you've been able to learn and develop over time.
Yeah, over time, and a lot of mentors and guidance. Another tip is I often treat my family like a team. So, I do a daily text that I usually take a piece of scripture and something out and send something out daily to them with some thoughts from me, and I'll address them as Team Wilmot. So I think there's something in language that you can use as a dad or as a mom that makes the group that you're leading feel like a team, whereas often families feel a little disconnected. It's brother, sister, mom, dad, and they don't really necessarily look at themselves as a unit and a team. I think there's something powerful in that language.
Oh, man, that's so good. I'm once a week for TechWood, I'm at all hands meeting. Let's talk about what we're doing and how we're focused.
Mm-hmm.
And each team is supposed to have a daily meeting. I don't do that for Team Crow.
Yeah, and you do. When you really think about it, it is a team, and the team is always as good as the best, and always not as good as the worst in that given day. So, and just like you would have it in a team here. So, if somebody's struggling inside the family unit, it's going to impact the entire team.
Awesome. I think that's such a valuable tip.
Yeah.
Your ethos doc, you said you've got statements. So is it really it's 3 statements about who you are as this role? Yeah,
no, it's a little bit more than 3 statements. It takes up an entire page. I'm pretty laconic, so it's not a lot of words, but it's just, I am a follower of God. I am devoted to my wife, Jennifer, and will be faithful beyond reproach. I take responsibility of leading my family with excellence. I take responsibility of leading my teams outside of my family with honor and integrity. I talk a little bit about discipline and the importance of discipline. So it's a statement that really defines who I am as a man, and who I am as a follower, leader, and how I want to act and live out my days. And it's a simple one pager. I've adjusted it maybe 2-3 times in the last decade. But something that I keep in my journal that I'd like to, I check in regularly, because I think sometimes what happens is when especially men, I've found that when they get wayward off of that ethos statement, that's when it can go downhill really fast. And you don't have to get too far off of your ethos to statement to get yourself into some bad situations.
There's got to be power in just saying it.
Yeah.
I've made this decision, and
it's written down. It's been shared with some select men in my life that hold me accountable, and so I think there's some power in that written document that holds me to who I want to be. And
I think it's a accepted statement in business that you aren't who you say you are, you're who you measure who you are. And so in personal life, it kind of makes sense. It's like, excuse me, we are going to be who I've written out, and I'm going to ask people to make sure that I stay true to that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So definitely some great tips already. And then as we zero in and that wash cycle time of life with kids and different things, I think we can easily look back and say, you know what, that was a really hard time. I could have done something different, maybe would have done something different. What would that be for you?
Yeah, there's tons. I mean, that's I have the benefit of being 50 and being able to look back and provide some insight in that way. A couple things. I'll start macro, then I'll go kind of specific ideas. One is, when I look back at that time, I don't remember any of the specific business things that would have gotten in the way of missing a key date, key birthday, game, ballet, things like that. Like there's a few things that I missed that I remember that I missed with my family, but I have no idea what I was doing and what was the business situation that caused me to miss it. So I think there's some insight in that. So be careful when you're making those decisions. They seem like, oh, I can't miss this meeting. But then when you get to be 50 and you're my age and you look back, you go, oh yeah, I could have missed that meeting. Like, I don't even remember what meeting it was about, but I do remember missing, a game or a situation. So I think there's some pretty powerful insight in that. Secondly, it's decisions that have implications, longer term in your children's life. So we were talking before the podcast started about how it's important to really, one of the most important roles as a dad and mom is to prepare your children for adulthood. And that takes a very, very different strategy than just being a good mom and dad. Like you can provide for your kids and you feel good about all the provision that you're giving them. And it's more of like, all right, I feel really good about it, but am I really doing value to my children? And if Jennifer was here, she'd kind of chuckle because she does hold me accountable that I tend to do too much for my kids. I cover them financially with a lot of stuff that maybe I shouldn't, everyday chores and tasks, taking the garbage out, things like that. I'll often be, the dad that just like, I'll just suck it up and do it because, I like doing hard things and, embrace the suck and just do it for them. But it feels good in the moment. But then I reflect back and I go, all right, am I doing them really a favor? Like, yeah, it helps them in the moment, but what am I teaching them long term? Like when they have to run their own home and they got to keep it clean and they got to take the garbage out every week, they're not going to have dad around. They're going to have to do it. Now they maybe will, but it's, as a dad, I could have gone back, and there's a lot of instances where I'm like, I could have done it differently, and with the mindset of what are they going to look like when they're 25 and 30, and what I'm doing today is that truly preparing them for those days?
I think there's value, and I feel personally convicted by that statement, and that there's value in really planning out, what are you doing? Yeah. Am I doing this to fulfill something in my own heart that I'm seeking? Like we talked specifically, I love spoiling my kids, mainly because I grew up in a bit harder of a financial situation. But now it's a lot easier for me. And so I get so much joy out of protecting my kids from having to feel like they're growing up in a financial. But there were so many things I learned there that made me who I am, that I'm kind of robbing my kids of having the experience of learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and how you feel today with being able to do that. You're now you're in some ways you're robbing them from that joy in the future, but you also have to be really careful that you're training them up to be really successful in their 20s and 30s with financial management. And if you're making it really easy on them, and I struggle with this big time. Like, this is probably one of my biggest failures as a leader of Team Wilmot, is I probably have done too much for my kids. And it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like, it doesn't make any sense, but it really does, because again, when you're thinking about, all right, what are they going to be like when they're 30? And if I'm paying for everything now and they're just used to that, are they going to have the skill to be able to effectively manage a budget and manage a checking account and make good financial decisions? And Jennifer and I's prayer is that my lack of leadership in that area doesn't turn into disaster, but it seems to be okay. So
that's kind of the beauty of grace and believing in kind of a higher power, and that there's going to be things that we're going to fail at, but they're going to be covered.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank goodness.
Thinking back, what was something you did great during those times? You talked a lot about coaching and participating in activities your kids were passionate about.
Yeah, there's a couple things. I had a conversation recently with my two boys, and there was some kind of podcast or something where the dad was kind of absent, and there was some regret from the boys on not having access to their dad because he traveled a lot and he was a business guy. And I asked them the question. I said, guys, when you look back on your your teens and your early teens and your youth, do you remember me being there? And they both were like, yeah, like we didn't even realize you traveled.
Oh, that's so good.
I mean, like that was pretty cool for me. That was a gift from God. It was a real encouragement that in the midst of traveling a lot and being away often, I mean, not like military often where you're gone months and months and months, but being gone enough that like I recognized that I felt it. I felt the misery of having to get on a plane and be away from them. For them to get to be in their 20s and look back and go, yeah, I don't even realize you traveled. Oh, you went to all those countries? I didn't even realize it. It's like that was a real blessing for me, and it was probably an indication of just how in I was when I was home, and not being the guy that when I was home working late nights and things like that. I had the blessing of coaching both of my boys' baseball teams, up until they were probably 14, 15, where it was appropriate. Didn't miss many sporting events and ballets and things like that. So it did take prioritization on my part. I prioritized their stuff so much more than my needs or things that I wanted, and I think that was good. I think it was valuable.
I think a reoccurring theme that I hear doing these is carve out the time for your family first, and you'll never regret it.
No, never. Yeah, I'm 50 and old, and look back, and I've got kids in my 20s now, and man, if I could go back and do it again, I would choose even more times with them. Because all the other stuff, it's just not that important, honestly. Like if I could have gone to 10 countries instead of 40, like roger that. Check.
Oh man, an area I think would be great for us to explore too together, and one I think we probably have neglected more so far through the conversations we've had, is you and Jennifer have an amazing relationship and high school sweethearts. How does that happen these days? How do you keep each other engaged so well in your marriage?
Yeah. So, and at some point she'll listen to this podcast, so I've got to,
maybe we'll have her as a guest next time.
We'll see how consistent the answers are. Well, a couple of things. First is there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. So, as much as I am still desperately in love with that woman, I know living with me isn't the easiest thing. And she would say the same thing to her. So I think, realistic expectations. Two is, we made a decision early on in our marriage to put Jesus at the center, and really make him the the sole focus of our satisfaction and needs. You know, when you rely too much on each other, that's when you can get into real problems, because we are both broken people. We're both sinful at the core. We let each other down. We say things that we don't mean. We hurt each other. And if she relied on me to be that sole provider of value to her, man, that would be a tough marriage, because I can't do that. So we made a decision early on in our lives that we would do that. And I think there's a general respect and friendship that we have together. Beyond the fact that she's absolutely gorgeous and I chase her all over the house, but there's a general friendship that we just like being together. We've been very fortunate that we do love spending time together. And interestingly, we're very different people. One of my getaway places is to be out in the woods in a tree. Hunting deer, and Jennifer wouldn't never do that. Like, she wouldn't go near that. So we do have different interests, but they seem to blend in a nice way. And I think we both have a very consistent love of our family and love spending time with them. So it just works out. But I am honestly the luckiest man in the world. She is an absolute gem, and I plan to keep her as long as God is willing.
Awesome. That's great. And I think, man, there's just so much power in the way you talk about your significant other, I think.
Well, I refer to her as my bride. It's funny. I've been in a few situations where I've referred to Jennifer as my bride, and they go, "Oh, you just get married?" Like, yeah, 27 years ago. They're like, like they couldn't get that concept. But you know what? She's my bride. She's as my bride as much 27 years later as she was the first day. And I think as a husband, there's two things that I try to do. I don't do them all with excellence. So if she was sitting right here, she would say that. But there's two things of pursuit. I think it's really important that husbands continue to pursue their brides like they did when they were first married. I recently asked a bunch of guys, take me through how you asked your wife to marry you. And we had this, stiff as a board guy talk about writing poems and, driving halfway across the country and literally just jumping through hoops of fire to get this woman to say yes. And they're all feeling good about themselves, telling all these creative stories. And then, afterwards it kind of paused, and I said, well, guys, all right, now I want you to tell me something you did remotely close to that in creativity in the last year. And it was silence. And I'm like, that's the issue with men. We when we want something, we go after it with a vengeance, and we'll do anything possible to get it, and we will conquer it. But once we've conquered it, sometimes we kind of get apathetic.
Check that box.
Yeah, and and that's deadly in a marriage. If you can pour into your bride and pursue her like you did when you were dating and you were trying to get her to say yes to you. And you watch what that does to your marriage.
Try to earn that yes every day.
Yeah.
See how things change for you. That's awesome. And you're in a very unique spot. You have one who's in high school and two in college, one out and about to get married.
Yeah. So one about to get married. He's going to get married in April. Absolute gem of a girl, Kayla. We love her, and she's already become a daughter. We've got a daughter at UGA who is going to go into medicine, so she's either going to go into the PA route or med school, or she hasn't decided yet, but she's a senior at UGA. And then son Nate at the University of Tennessee, and he's studying to be a PT. And Ava, who's in high school. So yeah, we still have our crips in the teens, which is always fun.
How has parenting changed from high school to college?
Oh, dramatically. Just dramatically. It's I feel for young parents today, because they've just got culturally this inertia that goes against them. When Noah was a teen, social media was still big and cell phones were still big, but it just seems like in the last 5 years, there's just been this scale of influence, of just difficulty, leading teenagers when they have these cell phones. And I think that's one of the biggest things that Jennifer and I have just been, dealing with is with Ava, is just the power and influence that social media and cell and texts and, that friend group. And, we laugh. We're like, my goodness, like I would have like literally crashed and burned a plane if I grew up in an age of current, our teens are current up. And I mean, like just, for the instant knowledge of everything and seeing it, it's overwhelming. So we're trying to work through, all of that in this age of social media, in this age of a very permissive culture, a culture that's moving in a direction that's much more liberal in nature. It's, as parents that want to, have firm kind of biblical conservative values in our home and how we lead them, we're kind of going against the grain. So we've got to, it's kind of a tough walk that we do.
You probably don't know this. I don't think I've told you yet, but through some of our conversations, you talked about how the car is a no cell phone zone. And I took that with my 11-year-old, who I've noticed has just started, like, the car is a place where he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to escape and play a game. And no, Van, we're going to put the phone down. This is going to be a no cell phone zone for us. And the conversations that you can have with them when they're not in that phone in the car, because it's so much more comfortable to talk to your kid when you're not having to look at them.
Yeah, no doubt. And they seem to be, at least with ours, that they seem to be more open in the car. I've had some, I have a truck, and my daughter's always kind of like, it's not a joke, but it's fun. It's like dad's truck, it's when they, and it's a special place that both of my daughters have seen value in spending time with me. So with Ava, currently, with Hannah being away, she doesn't get many truck rides as we used to. But with Ava now, it's just, I love it. It's like my favorite time to be with her is her and I alone in my truck, listening to music, connecting. We're usually going to to our horse and spend some time there. And that experience is typically cell phone free, because we're engaging. The only thing we're using a cell phone is potentially music. When we're at the farm with the horse, you got to be eyes on anyway, because those animals are crazy. So you can't be looking at your cell phone when you're dealing with them. So I think I would encourage in our conversation, the moms and dads out there, find those spaces that can be really anti-phone.
Protect them.
Yeah, protect them, and don't allow phones into them, because if those spaces become really beautiful.
Yeah, and they're becoming so. I'm learning as they get older. It's easy to lose those moments if you don't protect them.
No doubt, because the phone is so invasive. I mean, it's just so invasive. Someday as a society we'll look back and go, oh my goodness, what have we done?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about parenting. We've talked a lot about marriage. Let's talk a little bit more from the business side.
Sure.
I know some of the things that I find inspiring from you is your leadership and the way you encourage your team to have a well-balanced life. What are some things that you've done in your roles to inspire your company to be more considerate of people, and what's the result of that?
Yeah, I think one of the first things as a leader, if you truly want to be a leader that drives, balance, an employee balance, and I'll explain a little bit of what I mean by balance, but it has to begin with trust. Okay, if you don't if you don't trust your people, it's really difficult to then go and say, oh, well, we're going to be a balanced organization, and we really want you to be good physically, spiritually, and intellectually, and disconnect that from your KPIs and what you have to do for this organization. I have found, and listen, there's probably others that won't agree with this, but I have found that when a team member feels that balance, they actually contribute more to the organization than when they don't. I've worked for leaders that are punch the clock type of leaders. Like, they want to know how many hours you sit at the desk, and punch the clock at 8:00. I want you here until at least till 5, and they just don't have that trust. And I've actually seen that you get less out of people than when you open it up. So the two companies that I've led, we have kind of an open work environment, we don't have a vacation policy. You take what you need. Okay. Like if you need to take 5 weeks in a given year, then take 5 weeks. lay out your objectives. We'll talk about it, but I want you balanced, because if you're stressed and you've got home issues and you're not going to give me your best. I found that balance, but it requires a lot of trust. It requires that you trust people, that they're managing their time right, and that they're getting their job done, but also really balanced. And I look at in an individual, like 3 different drives. They've got a spiritual drive, whether they're spiritual or not. They've got a spiritual drive, and they need to allow that to manifest, and that discipline is really important. Then you've got physical discipline, and one of the things that we've done, especially with Team Dscoop, is really challenge the team to get after it more in terms of physical discipline. Get out and do walks. We've done walk challenges. We've done step challenges. My chief operating officer and I are connected together with our Apple Watches, and when he gets done with a workout, it always shows me. And he's in Belgium, so he's out there hustling, and he's always 5 hours ahead, 6 hours ahead. So I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, I gotta get moving, because Peter's challenged me on a step challenge. But I think physical discipline is really important, especially in business, when people are stressed out and they're on Zoom calls all day, and especially now this last year where there's a lot of Zoom fatigue and you're looking at a screen all day. Like, dude, get up, step up, go outside, get some fresh air, get some exercise, because it's so important. And then intellectual, we do a lot of we use Teams, Microsoft Teams, and there's we use a Learn channel, and we're constantly putting stuff on there, books, and I think it's important for leaders to continue to learn and read stuff that's outside of their expertise.
With that said, I've gotten several great books from you. Extreme Ownership is one that comes to mind. What's been some of the more influential material that you would want to encourage somebody to go explore? Yeah,
I gave you Extreme Ownership. It's a guy named Jocko Willink. I had built a relationship with a guy named Rourke Denver. He was an ex-Navy SEAL and now in kind of the leadership space. And man, when I looked at it, when I was leading LeaderCast, and that was our business, was leadership and looking at leaders, and holistically looking at it. We're in the world of some of the best leaders. I can't find a better organization than the U.S. Navy SEALs. These are folks that number one, put it all out just to get to become that. And then when they do, they can't lose. They're in a must-win type of an environment. So they figured out this formula of leadership that is pretty powerful. So a lot of their content, guys like Jocko Willink, Rourke Denver. There's a ton of them out there that are putting some stuff out there.
Is that Commander's Coffee?
Yeah, that's Commander's Coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. I love it.
Great.
One of the most influential things for TechWood was when COVID hit, and you shared his kind of Commander's Coffee on setting the horizon.
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah, how far are you going to set it? Because everything under it is going to be a little bit easier.
Yep.
And so as we plan for how we're going to deal with COVID, we can plan for it to be not bad, or we can plan for it to be really bad. And if we plan for it to be really bad, everything under it is going to feel a little bit easier.
Yeah, and it's crazy when he did that video. A lot of people gave him some flack. Like, 2 years, come on! It's a crazy U.S. Navy SEAL. They're always just nuts, and they're. But look where we are, and he's not that far off, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So hugely impactful. So material from Navy SEALs is, I think, a good recommendation.
Yeah, it really is. It's really good content. There's a lot of great content in the creative innovation space. Anything that you can pick up from on building creative behaviors. A lot of books out there. I can I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's some Sticky Wisdom is one book that's just outstanding. If you look it up on Amazon, Sticky Wisdom. It's by a bunch of crazies that started this company called What If. We used them at Coca-Cola. Part of my role at Coke was to do some pretty big, cool projects. But even more exciting part of the role was building creative capability in the teams inside the organization to make them capable of being more creative. And they get into these suite of behaviors like realness. How do you make ideas come to life in a way that connects people's heads and heart? greenhousing. How do you as a leader greenhouse new ideas and using concepts like yes and instead of no? There's some really cool behavioral things that are game changers when your team grasps those things. So we've used that a lot with Team Dscoop is yes and behavior. And yes and doesn't mean that you have to, everybody's idea is right. It can be like, yes, and if we do these 3 or 4 modifications, it can really lead to a success. But as leaders, oftentimes we're so quick to say no. Because a lot of organizations are built of, a lot of leaders that can say no to things, but very few that can actually say yes. And that seeps into a culture. And then you've got this organization that's very quick to say no to stuff. And I saw a study recently, it was pretty interesting, when somebody's in a meeting situation when there's more than 3 or 4 people in a room, and if they put up an idea and it gets squashed in the wrong way, it's like, they won't come back for another year with a new idea in your organization. So, imagine that. You grab your team together, all of Techwood, and somebody has this idea that's a little crazy, and it gets, in a not good way turned
and not
down.
Intentional.
And maybe not even intentionally. Maybe not even mean like that was a stupid idea, but even just like non-intentional, like body language or, whatever. And you basically shut them down versus, that concept of greenhousing where you go, right, like tell me a little bit more about that idea. Let's get it on paper. Let's get it on the whiteboard. And yes, and if we did these things, it has the more likelihood of getting launched. Now all of a sudden you've encouraged them to continue to bring ideas forward because you want those people in your organization that come up with crazy ideas because oftentimes
that's where opportunity is.
Yeah, they find this stuff that just nobody else can find because they just look in insights in the most unlikely places.
Yeah, I think trust plays a big role in that too.
Huge.
They've trusted you with this idea. What are you going to do with it if you're going to squander it? You're no longer trustworthy.
Yeah. And not only just what you're going to do with it, but that initial response. And that's where we were always hitting on leaders at Coke because they had this culture of kind of like a little bit of an arrogance kind of thing. And, it was a little bit of a, alpha kind of environment. And, that was deadly because, people would bring ideas forward and somebody would be like, no, that's just no way that could happen. Or, just like not being rude about it, but just shooting and killing the idea right away. You not only kill that idea, but you kill the person bringing it. And then they're likely not going to bring another idea for months and months and months, and that's just deadly.
One of the biggest things here at Techwood is we've been so intentional about hiring people too, that can fit in that culture of ideas. And we spend a lot of time and thus money into making sure we have the right people. And so to render them useless by being unintentional, I could see how that could be very damaging.
And it's behavioral. Creativity is as much, there's art and science to creativity and innovation. There's a science and there's a process and there's an approach that an organization has to use to take an idea and concept it out and get it to market. But then there's also art, which is very behavioral and how leaders act and how leaders are, and that can be as important in the kind of driving the culture of innovation in an organization. Is driven by a lot of conditions and then people capabilities and then ultimately how you measure it. If you're not measuring creativity and you're not measuring innovation, it's likely not going to be consistent. Like I often will go into an organization and go, hey, all right, what's your net future value of new ideas in your organization? And the CEO will be like, what are you talking about? Like, well, are you measuring the net present value of new initiatives? And they don't, and I'm like, well, how are you expecting innovation to happen if you're not like measuring it? And then another great metric is freshness index, like what % of your annual revenue is due to things that have been launched in the last, year or 2 years, depending on the company. You change that, you change the dynamic, but If that freshness index isn't in at least a certain level, you're not getting enough new ideas into the pipeline. Now, you don't want it to be too high where you're just like, because it's
risk.
It's a huge risk, and it's typically costly that first year. But you certainly want your freshness index to be number one measure, number two to be at a certain level, because that'll show you the churn of future ideas.
Well, all the way back to our conversation around pursuing your wife. Pursue her every day, pursue new ideas every day. And as you said, as we've got some innate desires to grab and conquer things. And so if you never give up the fight, then you'll always feel some fulfillment.
Oh, no doubt.
And always be chasing the right things.
And that's one of the things I've been really encouraged about my time with you at Techwood is there's constant conversation around, all right, like what new capabilities can this organization deliver out to the marketplace? Because I don't think you've uncovered even half of the things that 5 years from now Techwood will be doing. And I think that's an exciting spot to be in, that it's not stagnant. That you're able to go from, this is our base of an organization and we do it really well, but oh, by the way, we can do this and we can actually do that too, and we can do this, and that's an exciting place to be.
Well, Keith, it's been I think a powerful conversation for me personally, very impactful. I think there's some things that I'm feeling convicted on in my own life that I can maybe focus a little bit more on and be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more balanced on. So I do appreciate your time.
Good to be here. Always.
Thank you for joining us.